Hey, I found this next to a crumpled heap of clothes in a pile near an overflowing dumpster on my way home from the bar this weekend. A brown envelope with a couple of double-sided sheets of paper inside. It couldn't have been there long. There was some rain on the ground, but the paper was barely wet. Naturally, I thought of you. Best regards, Bjorn. I was working as a nurse in the ICU, and I had just started my night shift. It was a quiet night on the unit. A few patients. Someone on a ventilator, someone else needing intensive care for another reason. At that moment, I wasn't assigned to any patients, so when the ER called about an overdose being brought up, my colleague and I gladly took it. A slow night can be nice sometimes, but they tend to drag unbearably when there's nothing to do. A quick report from the ER nurse, an overdose of psychiatric meds and sleeping pills. The patient was reportedly pretty mobile, which is usually code for a total mess. The anesthesiologist had been called to the ER to try and sedate the patient before transport. A few minutes later, they wheeled her in, and my fears were immediately confirmed. The patient, a young woman, barely in her 20s, lay on the gurney thrashing her arms and legs in all directions at once. She was small, fragile-looking, with long, brown hair. At first glance, she could have been anyone, but a closer look revealed the scars. Nearly every inch of her arms was covered in them, some old, some barely healed, some still fresh. It's not unusual to see that in the ICU. We get a few overdoses every month. Young women are overrepresented, and self-inflicted cuts on the arms are a common theme. But this was extreme, even for cases like that. The sedation had helped somewhat, but not enough. The ER staff pushing the gurney tried to calm her with gentle words, but she was beyond reach. Lost in a world of her own, her brain struggling to balance the effects of the drugs. Once inside, the anesthesiologist came in, saying she'd need more sedation than what he had dared to give in the ER. Thankfully, she had an IV line, so we quickly hooked up a continuous drip of sedatives. Slowly, uncertainly, her movements became sluggish, uncoordinated. The wide, frantic eyes that had avoided all eye contact began to close for longer and longer stretches. Finally, she drifted into a deep, drug-induced sleep, and we could start working on her. We hooked her up to the monitors, cleaned her up, placed additional IVs, inserted a catheter. More fluids were connected, and after an hour or so, we had things under control. She was placed on her side, standard practice to keep her airway clear, just in case she vomited. My colleague and I would take turns sitting with her, 1 hour at a time. I took the first shift, settling onto a hard wooden chair beside her bed, laptop open in front of me. I started reviewing her medical records. Bipolar disorder, under evaluation for suspected schizophrenia. She had heard voices, sometimes hallucinated, multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. Her psych history was extensive. There was a theory about when her symptoms had begun, but there was also speculation about a genetic factor. Her grandmother had suffered from the same illness, and the triggering event was believed to be that very grandmother's sudden suicide. A severe trauma. Not just because they had been close, but because the young woman lying in front of me had been there when it happened. Jesus Christ, I thought. How much can one person endure? Earlier that day, they had found her in her apartment. She hadn't answered the door when a home care nurse arrived to administer her medication. The landlord was called to unlock the door, and there she was, unresponsive on the couch, empty pill bottles beside her. Paramedics had been dispatched. On the way to the hospital, she had regained consciousness but couldn't communicate, except by kicking and lashing out. But now, she was sleeping. The Poison Control Center had provided guidelines which the doctor relayed to us. She would survive this. She just needed rest. Time for her body to clear the toxins. We'd monitor her kidney and liver function. Time crawled forward. I read through her file, made some notes, and let my gaze wander between the screen, the patient, and the monitor at regular intervals. Screen, patient, monitor, screen, patient, She was staring at me, wide-eyed, clear gaze, focused on me, expressionless. The initial shock passed quickly, and I stood up to administer another bolus dose of sedative, ready to put her back under. Her lips moved, weakly, barely noticeable, but still, like she was trying to say something. She wasn't thrashing anymore, not violent, not struggling, so I hesitated, held my finger above the pump button but didn't press it. Instead, I met her gaze. "Hey," I said gently. "You're in the ICU. You were brought here earlier." Her lips moved some more, a quiet whimper that grew into a drawn-out moan. "Oh," like she was warming up her voice, testing her ability to speak again. "Don't talk," I said softly. "Just rest. You can talk in the morning when you're stronger." She fell silent, but her eyes never left mine. Once again, I reached for the sedative pump. "That stupid little bitch tried to silence me," she said angrily. I froze mid-motion, my mouth wide open. "What did you say?" "That little brat, that pathetic little idiot. She tried to get rid of me. What a fool." "You need to rest now," I told her, keeping my voice calm. "No, I don't. I need to talk. I want to talk to someone. Imagine being stuck with an idiot like that all the time. I want to talk to someone else for once. You wouldn't deny an old soul a simple conversation now, would you?" I sat down again, unsure what to think. She continued. "Can't really blame her for trying to get rid of me. Plenty have tried. None have succeeded. And we've had our battles over the years, she and I." She broke eye contact and stared at her arm stretched out in front of her. "Sometimes, I think she's trying to carve me out of her body, cut me away, like a tumor." Her voice suddenly shifted, cheerful, almost playful. "But that's not how it works." Just then, my colleague entered to switch shifts. An hour had already passed. "Damn, it's freezing in here," she said. "Did you turn the thermostat down?" I hadn't noticed, but now that she mentioned it, the room was much colder than it should have been. "No," I replied. "Has it been quiet?" "Yeah." I hesitated. "She's talking. She's awake." She bent over the patient, checking her closely, lifted her hand, let it drop, pressed a fingernail hard to test for pain response. Nothing. "Well, she's asleep at the moment." I got up and left. Said I'd be back in an hour. I needed food, something normal, something routine. But as I warmed my meal in the break room, I couldn't stop thinking about the last hour. This wasn't just a psychiatric episode. This was something else, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what. I sat back down for my next shift. My colleague said it had been quiet. No signs that she was awake or even aware. I opened my laptop again, but something gnawed at me, a lingering unease that wouldn't go away. It wasn't just nerves. The whole situation felt wrong. The girl was breathing evenly, peacefully. "I think this should stay our little secret, dear," she said. I snapped my head up. Her eyes were open again, locked onto mine. "If you tell anyone about this, Things will go very badly for you. And we wouldn't want that, would we? The initial shock wore off faster this time, replaced by irritation. Are you threatening me? I asked. It's my job to report changes in a patient's condition. It's my duty. Duty? She scoffed, her voice dripping with amusement. That's a big word. Where was your duty when you killed that old woman 4 years ago? Room 17, remember? Was that your duty? Your job? Spare me your self-righteous bullshit. I couldn't respond. My jaw locked. My tongue felt useless. Because it had happened. Even the room number was correct. I had buried it, pushed it so far back in my mind that it barely existed anymore. An old woman, dying in agony at the hospital where I worked before transferring to the ICU. Tumors filled her abdomen, causing unbearable pain. She didn't know where she was. She was confused, terrified, suffering. She was going to die in a few days anyway, so I had given her a massive dose of painkillers, knowing full well it would kill her. It did. Her breathing slowed, became shallow, then stopped, peacefully. I had never felt guilty about it, never told a soul. I had simply claimed I dropped the rest of the medication and had to discard it. Yet this girl knew. How? I stammered. I know more about you than you can possibly imagine, dear, she said, her voice almost playful. And don't fool yourself into thinking you helped her. Her family comforted themselves by saying, she's in a better place now. She isn't. Something inside me, something primal, felt like I was drowning, like I was on a sinking ship in the middle of a violent storm with no hope of reaching land. But I would swim. I would fight. And with that defiance, I stared her down. She was mocking me. Her tone, her words, they mocked me. The way she spoke as if she knew something I didn't. It infuriated me. Oh yeah? I sneered. What else do you think you know about me? I knew I was making a mistake. Engaging in conversation with a psychiatric patient never ended well. I had done it before. It never led anywhere good. She smiled. Well, she mused, pretending to think. How about the way you let your mother rot away in that nursing home? Alone, confused, aware that you and your brothers had abandoned her in her final years. How she died in a dark room, scared and small, never understanding why you never visited. Anger flared inside me. How dare she mention my mother? That old miserable drunk who had done nothing but neglect us growing up, who had left us to fend for ourselves while she downed bottle after bottle of cheap wine, who had chosen cigarettes and vodka over us every single night. Yeah. We put her in a nursing home as soon as we could. No, we didn't visit. We justified it. Told ourselves people can't treat others like garbage their whole lives and expect love in return. She had died alone. And it wasn't our fault. She had never even told me who my father was. I had begged her to, over and over again. Said it was important to me, but she never did. As if reading my mind, the girl on the bed smirked. She never told you who your father was, huh? She said. Well, it doesn't really matter. Same trash, different name. The truth is, she didn't even know herself. Just some random drunk she brought home from a bar one night. He was gone by morning, and you were what was left behind. My breath caught in my throat. But it doesn't matter now, she continued, voice dripping with amusement. He stepped in front of a train 15 years ago. If you ask me, that was a mercy. She closed her eyes for a second as if lost in thought. Then she looked at me again, and for the first time that night, she smiled. He says hello, by the way, or what's left of him, at least. Oh, and one more thing. Your brothers hate you. They mock you behind your back. You never amounted to what they did. They rake in millions while you, the pathetic little humanist, scrape by on pennies. You're an embarrassment to them. They had never said that. Not once. But I knew it was true. I could see it in the way they looked at me, the smirks they exchanged when I talked about my job, the way they chuckled when I mentioned my vacations, cheap trips while they traveled the world in luxury, the way they never commented on my old car, my rented apartment, my lack of a mortgage in some fancy neighborhood. The defiance inside me drained away. I was left with nothing but exhaustion. I had no rational explanation for any of this. I was afraid, and yet, deep down, a small part of me felt intrigued. I wanted to know more. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. "Who are you?" She sighed. "Not important. I don't think you'd even understand if I tried to explain. What do you want?" "I already told you. I want to talk. She gestured vaguely at herself. "She's useless. She numbs herself with so much medication that she barely exists. But the old woman before her, no, she was fun. She fought back, even lasted a while, until she finally gave in." She grinned. "They all do, in the end." She suddenly looked tired. "You're exhausting me with your questions." "You were the one who wanted to talk," I shot back. "Not if you're just going to ask stupid questions. That gets old real fast. You ought to be quiet now. I need to rest. We'll talk soon again." I sighed. The clip that monitored her oxygen had slipped off. Lifting the blanket to put it back, I felt something wet. Blood. A small stream ran from her IV line. Her hand was slick with a milky white liquid. The sedative. It had been disconnected. For how long? I looked at her, and for the first time that night I saw something else. Not her, but a frightened, exhausted girl. And she was holding something in her hand. A scalpel. Where the hell did she get that? Her voice was small but steady. "I can't do this anymore," she cried out. And with one quick motion, she dragged the blade across her throat. Blood erupted, more than I expected, more than I could process. I ran around the bed, caught her as her legs gave out. Blood sprayed in thick, pulsing streams. Too much. Too fast. I dropped to my knees, catching her as she collapsed. My hands clamped over the wound on instinct, trying to stop the flow. But it was pointless. Blood poured between my fingers, soaking the floor, staining my scrubs. My colleagues must have seen the chaos on the monitors because they burst into the room before I could even scream for help. Lights flicked on. Someone shoved a towel in my hands. "Apply pressure," someone yelled. Another voice. "Where's the doctor?" For a moment, everything was just blood. Just blood. When the doctor arrived, it was already over. Her body lay limp in my arms. Her skin pale as wax. Her eyes open but empty. Dead. I was put on medical leave. Of course I was. No one questioned it. Not even me. A police investigation followed. I wasn't a suspect, but I had to sit through hours of interviews, recounting the night over and over again. They never figured out where she got the scalpel, how she hid it, and I never mentioned our conversation. Not a single word. If I had, they would have locked me up in the psych ward immediately. The nightmares started soon after, and the voice, that voice, it's always there, a rasping, aged voice. Or is it young? It wavers between registers, lodged somewhere in the space between. Most of the time, it's just a murmur, like someone speaking on the other side of a wall, words muffled and indistinct. Other times it whispers. It tells me what it wants to do to the people I pass on the street. Horrible things. And sometimes it screams. It wants me to open my mouth, to let it speak, to repeat its words aloud so the world can hear. It wants me to be its messenger, its prophet. It tells me how worthless people are, how humanity is a failed experiment that needs to be erased, how the floodgates are barely holding, how the right catastrophe, one final push, will open the way for the others, the ones waiting for us to make the mistake that lets them in. We've been close before, so close. In the trenches and the purges, in mushroom clouds and nuclear codes, in the camps and the showers, in falling towers and crumbling ruins. The barrier between us is stretched, strained, nearly broken. We've survived for thousands of years. Maybe we'll make it to the end of time. Maybe we won't. I see it sometimes. A shadow, just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes it dances, wild and frenzied. Sometimes it just stands there. But the worst are the visions. They come like lightning strikes, sudden, violent, unstoppable. I see burning skies, bloodied bodies falling from the heavens, towering figures watching us as we plummet. A barren, dead landscape under an eternal, filthy twilight. Twisted creatures crawling in agony. Primitive people huddling around fire pits, believing they're safe. I see humans slaughtering each other, maiming, torturing, and I rejoice, and I mourn. I see guillotines dropping, screaming crowds hungry for blood. I see plague-ridden corpses, villages wiped out by disease. I see bodies swaying from thick tree branches like grotesque fruit. A man, covered in sores, weeping before 10 graves. 3 figures are crucified on a hill, and I shudder with pleasure, and I retch. I see mass graves and burning ovens, machetes and hollow eye sockets, grinning skulls, guard towers and barbed wire, boots pressing down on bowed heads, cobblestone streets running red with blood, poisoned water, choking air, and I feel ecstasy and terror, victory and despair. These aren't hallucinations, not delusions. They're memories, memories of an endless, cursed existence. Memories meant to bring it joy, and me, misery. Maybe even a glimpse of what's to come. I've sought refuge in churches, hoping it couldn't follow me inside. I was wrong. I've prayed, begged for help, for salvation, and it answered. It told me the God I pray to is very far away, that it was they who were cast down here, that my God knows better than to set foot in this place, and that he is very, very aware of them. How many others are like me? How many carry passengers? How many of the madmen on the street screaming about doomsday and demons are actually telling the truth? How many have been worn down, eroded, until they couldn't fight anymore? How many unwilling hosts have given up, let themselves be consumed? How many are there? I'll keep swimming. For now. but I feel it growing inside me, day by day, like lead weights dragging me under. The currents grow stronger, the waves higher, the storm rages. I choke on salt and sulfur. My arms grow weaker, heavier. One day I won't be able to stay afloat. I hope, with what little hope I have left, and I pray, and I suggest you do the same. Even if no God is listening, pray that you're not the one standing beside me when I take my last breath, that you're nowhere near my deathbed, or my body in some forgotten alleyway. Pray that you don't end up carrying what I've carried for months. I will keep this letter on me, every hour, every day, and we will hope together, you and I, unknown reader. Because what else can we do?